our next speaker, we're very excited. I was in Paris at a international organisation for marriage conference, and we went to some event that was happening off to the side, and Jennifer Lahl was speaking there, and I was impressed. I said, I've got to get it to New Zealand. This was in 2015 in Paris. And so I apologise, it's taken 7 years to get you here. But Jennifer Lahl is part of the Bioethics and Culture. I didn't get that label right because I haven't got my paperwork, but you know what it is. She'll explain it to you. But it's a very topical issue at the moment because obviously the government is pushing to liberalise the laws around donor conception, around surrogacy. And Jennifer Lahl is, in my view, the world expert on it. So we are very privileged to have her here, and her husband Dan. We almost didn't let them in the country. We made them wear a mask on the flight, but they still made it, so it's a miracle. So please welcome Jennifer Lahl.
Anyway, it's really wonderful to be here, and it has been a long time coming. I didn't realize it had been that many years that we've been trying to get me here. I thought I just blame everything on the last 2 years of COVID that's thrown the world into tizzy. But Bob has given me the task of addressing surrogacy with you all today. And based on my experience, I think I have a big job ahead of me, because in an audience that is this big, I would imagine there's some of you who've never thought about it. Some of you have thought about it and think, oh, that's a nice way to help people have babies. Or somebody like me who's thought about it and says the only way forward is a total abolitionist approach. So I am unabashedly 100% against any kind of surrogacy. And just to put your minds at ease, no, I'm not Catholic. So, because believe it or not, among our major religions, the only church that has a standing on surrogacy is the Catholic Church, and that position is to oppose surrogacy. And in fact, assisted reproductive technology and other things we'll talk about in a minute. If you look at Protestantism, depending on where you are on the liberal or conservative faith, you know, it's a mixed bag. Within Mormonism, it's a mixed bag. Mitt Romney has 3 grandchildren through commercial gestational surrogacy. It's a mixed bag with Muslims. I spoke once at a big conference in Qatar, and I thought my message would be surely very well received in a very Muslim country, and I was surprised that half of the people in the audience wanted to send me on a plane back to America right away. And within, if I didn't mention, Judaism is also very divided on this. So I am not Catholic, but I am 100% against surrogacy. I can't talk about surrogacy first without talking about the larger category, which we call third-party conception. Much of surrogacy depends on third-party conception, not always, but much of it does. So, for example, in the United States, we have a very high-profile conservative public figure media darling by the name of Dave Rubin. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Dave Rubin, but Dave Rubin is a gay man. He's married to a man whose name is also Dave. It must be, in this world of gender confusion and non-binary, being married to somebody who has the same name as you. But when Dave Rubin and his husband announced that they were going to be fathers through surrogacy, I was surprised by how many very high-profile conservative people who you would put in the traditional family value category, pro-life, against critical race theory in schools, whatnot, celebrated and congratulated Dave online. Just congratulations, we're so happy for you. And I thought, oh, here I am again, the party pooper. As I was tweeting people going, what? I thought you were in favor of traditional family values. And so you cannot talk about surrogacy without recognizing that often it's a third party that's involved. So in the case of the 2 Daves, they bragged that they used the same egg donor. So from the same woman, they took eggs. They wanted to use their own sperm so that they each got their own baby. So the embryos were made from the same egg donor. I feel like I need a flow chart. The same egg donor with different sperm. And then they implanted them into separate surrogate mother wombs. So they hired 2 women to carry their babies. So the babies are kind of like twins because they have the same genetic mother, but they're kind of not twins because they have different fathers and they're born of different birth mothers. So you have to talk about egg donors, risks to egg donors, what's involved in egg donation. You have to talk about the rights of children that are created in these obscure, bizarre third-party conceptions, often commercial conception arrangements. You have to talk about the surrogate and the rights of the woman who's being basically a womb for hire. And the whole industry, what I call big fertility, of making babies in the laboratory. And it really truly is a reproductive tourism industry, because your country, New Zealand right now, is revising or looking at revising your outdated laws on surrogacy. And you need to catch up with people like the United States or my state, California, which I call the wild, wild, wild west of reproductive medicine. Where did Elton John come to have his babies with his husband? To California. So also, I just want to give a brief overview because I'll be talking about a lot of the technology. And for those of you who don't know how babies are made in the lab, AI in this case is not artificial intelligence. It is the low-tech artificial insemination. I was in an earlier life a pediatric critical care nurse, and I worked at the University of California, San Francisco. And it was not uncommon for single nurses, female women, biological women, to go home with sperm that perhaps a male nurse had donated to give to them. And they would just artificially inseminate themselves at home. It's low tech, think turkey basters and cups. And that's been around for a long, long time. I'm not a fan of it. I'm not supporting it. I'm just describing it. And so it's been around for a long time. I mean, I'm in New Zealand. Where did we learn all this? On the farms, right? The farmers artificially inseminate the pigs and the cows. And they're like, well, if it's good enough for the pigs and the cows, it must be good enough for human beings. But fast forward. So we were only able to use sperm donation, low-tech, artificial insemination for hundreds and hundreds of years until, vavoom, what happened in 1978? We had the birth of the first test tube baby, Louise Brown. And Louise was born in the United Kingdom. I think she just celebrated her 44th birthday. Somebody do the math. But so she's now a mother herself. But what was significant about that was that we're actually able to get eggs out of the woman's body, inseminate those eggs, fertilize those eggs in the laboratory, then transfer that fertilized embryo back into Mrs. Brown's body, and then voila, we had Louise Brown was born. But you have to realize that there was many, many, many years of trial and error getting to that. So it was a lot of attempts in the laboratory. And there's a great book called The Mother Machine, written by Gina Correa. And there's a lot of women that didn't even realize that they were part of this, human experimentation. They were guinea pigs, as the doctors were trying to figure out how to get eggs out of a woman's body. Let your conscience be your guide here. It's really easy to get sperm out of a man's body. Not so easy to get eggs out of a woman's body. It's not so easy to make an embryo in the lab that survives that creation, that technique. It's not so easy to then transfer that embryo into a uterus. And it's not so easy to get that embryo to attach and end in a live birth. So it was really a big day, and the headlines all around the world were the announcement of this first test tube baby. It's like the glass ceiling had been broken. We'd finally been able to advance low-tech reproductive technology forward. And then, this is for our Australian people, for Rachel and others. 5 years later, after Louise Brown was born, we have the first baby born, documented in the medical literature, who was born of a donor egg. So Louise Brown was Mrs. Brown's egg, Mr. Brown's sperm. 5 years later, we helped a husband and wife have a baby using an egg from another woman. And that often happens because, for whatever reason, the woman who's trying to conceive, her eggs are old, her eggs are poor quality, she has some problem with her fertility. So we went, aha, we can solve that problem by taking eggs from healthy women. And we have a saying in the field of bioethics, sort of the deconstructing of our reproductive bodies, that the birth control pill allowed us to have sex without having babies, And now reproductive technologies allow us to have babies without even having sex, right? Elton John, Dave Rubin, no sexual act whatsoever in the creation of their children. So once we took everything, and this is a bright line for me, when you think of, well, what can fertility medicine, what can reproductive medicine do ethically? Everything that still leaves egg and sperm in the body, right? Once we took, the egg and the sperm out of the body, that's when the doo-doo hit the fan. So here's where we find ourselves today. Modern day, New Zealanders in this global, largely unregulated, chaotic industry, multi-billion dollar industry. We have postmenopausal pregnancies. So we have literally women who are post-menopause who can now become mothers because they can get a donor egg. And if they have a husband, use his sperm, or if they don't, they can go to the sperm bank. Litter births. Who remembers Octomom? This is California, right? The wild, wild west of reproductive medicine. This is where I begin my apology tour for everything that comes out of my state of California. But literally, are women's bodies designed to give birth to 8 babies? As an ex-pediatric critical care nurse, I know even a twin pregnancy is very, very high risk, let alone a litter birth. Twiblings and triplings, what the Rubens are doing, where you're kind of creating siblings, but they're not really siblings, and these are really strange configurations. The whole area of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. It used to be, on ultrasound, they could maybe say, it looks like the baby has a defect. Looks like the baby might have Down syndrome. It looks like the baby might be missing limbs or something like that. Now we can actually, in the laboratory, do the testing. Does this baby have Down syndrome? Is this baby a boy baby? Because if we're going to pay for a baby, we want the baby we want. And all that whole area of just, when you think of designer babies, picking and choosing, when you look at the catalogs for sperm donors and egg donors, it's very much driven by characteristics, height, intelligence, IQ. Save your siblings. If anybody, again, this is my American example, but there was a great book out years ago by Jodi Picoult called My Sister's Keeper, which was then made into a movie. And we saw this in pediatric nursing. If you have a sick child who's in need of a bone marrow transplant, and if that child doesn't get that transplant, then that child perhaps has a high likelihood of dying. So now we can create, in the laboratory, embryos from the mother and father. We can test those embryos and find out which one is the genetic match for the sick child who's living, and then that baby is carried to term. When the baby is born, they collect the blood-rich umbilical cord blood that's rich in stem cells, and they do the bone marrow transplant to the sick child. And basically that child is the savior, because that child was born to save the life of the sick sibling. And that's actually happened quite often in the United States. I'm not sure if it's happened here, but the first young boy was Adam Nash, and he was in Chicago, and his parents did this. And you have to wonder, what does this do to the dignity of the child who was created, specifically as an end to a mean, the dignity of the children who were created that didn't make the cut, so they weren't, selected to come to life in order to save the life. Singles, mothers by choice, huge demographic. Fathers by choice, single dads by choice. Same-sex parenting, I talked about. Gamete donation, gametes are egg and sperm. When is it okay? The American Society of Reproductive Ethics has guidelines for, can a sister be a surrogate for her sister, or can a sister give her eggs to her sister? Oh yeah, that's so nice. Can a dad give his son his sperm so his son will impregnate his wife with his father's sperm? People are going to go, oh, I don't really know if that's okay. So just the intricacy. Or do we just go to catalogs and get egg and sperm from strangers? Is that the way to go? Grandmother surrogacy is big too. You see lots of stories in the news all the time of women, older women like myself. I could technically, I hope to be a grandmother someday, but what happens when I carry my grandchildren to term, because perhaps my daughter, for one reason or another, can't carry a pregnancy to term. So all these problems. So the first film I made, because one of the ways we communicate people, other than me flying around and giving talks to groups like you, is we make movies. And we made this film called Eggsploitation. And that is a movie, documentary, that just looks at different young women in America who saw ads in their school papers to help somebody have a baby, help make dreams come true, and oh, by the way, make some much needed cash. And in Eggsploitation, you'll meet all these women who had serious short-term risks, harms, as well as longer term. In the short term, from the high-dose fertility drugs, these women, they talk about their bellies getting so big, they look like they're pregnant, their ovaries get huge, they can suffer stroke. 2 of the women in the film immediately suffered massive strokes. Because of their strokes, they lost their own fertility. They'll never be able to have children of their own. And then the longer-term risks. Several of the women in the film went on as young women to develop breast cancer. And breast cancer is one of the things that egg donors are screened out of from not having. You know, you don't pay a woman $20,000 for her eggs if she checks, yes, I have a history of breast cancer. So these were women who were screened out, no medical history whatsoever, and went on as very young women, normally a cancer that doesn't strike young women, to develop breast cancer. And then I'm going to show a quick little clip from Eggsploitation.
And we see young women being looked at as a market for eggs.
If you're tall, attractive, physically fit, and have a desire to help, and what person doesn't want to see themselves that way?
You have to be attractive woman of all ethnicity between the age of 21 and 29. So that's also pretty screwed up, I think.
On top of that, they looked for someone with a very good education. They did an IQ test on me.
And they made it seem like it was, you know, destiny that this couple found me, and it was this whole big thing.
And so I did the math, and I figured out that I needed about $3,000. And if I had that $3,000, everything would be fine.
I just very much had the altruistic piece of me triggered.
Everything that happened to me was a chain of events where certain medical risks were not taken into account.
And when he saw my distended abdomen, his face went white.
She looked as if she were 6 months pregnant. I couldn't believe it.
My stomach bloated up so bad that I couldn't even breathe. At that point, I had to go to the hospital.
The whole time I felt like they were trying to get rid of me.
And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Oh, Alexandra, we will try to save your ovary, but you may lose your ovary."
I did make poor decisions as a result of the financial compensation.
And I made a decision to sell my eggs. That affected my ability to reproduce.
I mean, I can't have my own children now.
My story isn't documented in any statistics anywhere.
They become forgotten. They're a faceless person that comes in and donates their eggs, and then they're gone.
You can watch all of my films for free on our YouTube channel too, just a little blurb. Center for Bioethics and Culture Network, our YouTube channel has all of our films there for free. So egg donation is very, very exploitative. It's very risky to the young woman's short-term health as well as her long-term health. These are some of the ads. You know, my husband, who's here with me, went to UC, University of California, Berkeley. 2 of our daughters went to the University of California, Berkeley. These ads are very prominent in big newspapers on campuses like Stanford. You see this. They want a genius egg donor, not just some stupid egg donor. Give us a genius one. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Real quick, as a caveat, we tried to get Stanford University to pull their ads. One of the women in Eggsploitation was a Stanford student. At the time, suffered a massive stroke, was paid $750 because the stroke meant that she wasn't able to go forward with selling her eggs. We tried to get Stanford University to pull their ads from the student paper, and they said, we make so much money from the fertility industry that pays to run ads in our school paper that we can't say no to those ads, even though they knew that it was putting young women at Stanford at risk. You can't talk about third-party conception without talking about the children that are born of this. In our film, Anonymous Father's Day, you'll meet these people who were born of anonymous sperm donation. France just last week announced that no longer will egg or sperm donation be allowed to be anonymous. It's a step in the right direction. Colorado is the first state in the United States that has now said that egg and sperm donors cannot be anonymous. So the children, if they're told, a lot of children are still lied to, but if they're told that they were born of anonymous egg or sperm donation, by the time they're 18, they have the right to go down and get access to their records that will show who their biological mother or father is. So you'll hear through these young people how they found out. Sometimes they knew from a really early age, like Alana on the screen. Her parents had gone through adoptions and they were having trouble conceiving, so she had a Korean adopted sister. So as a little girl, she had Caucasian parents, she was Caucasian. It begged sort of an explanation about why she had this Korean, sister. Whereas Stephanie, on the other hand, found out when she was in her 30s only because her father was dying of some really serious health issues. And so she asked her mother, was she at risk for developing these health problems her dad was having? And it was at that point that she was told, oh, he never told you, but your father is not your biological father. So you can imagine the sort of the bomb that was sort of landed in her lap at that moment. And then Barry here is kind of famous because his sperm donor dad, he calls him his bio dad, was the husband of a very prominent fertility doctor in London, a woman. You have to say that these days when you say the husband of, married to a woman. But she used her husband as her star donor for 3 decades. So if you can imagine being married to the man, and for 3 decades he was providing all the sperm that he was using to help women, get pregnant, you can just imagine. So I'm actually gonna fast forward through that if you don't mind. And unfortunately, sperm donors are not paid that much money. Again, back to how easy it is to get sperm out of a man's body. So a sperm donor can, about $100 to $175 a specimen. But it's money-driven, it's eugenic-driven. It's not like we just want anybody to, sperm. We want handsome, smart, accomplished people. My first film that I made on surrogacy, so I'm moving quickly into surrogacy, was called Breeders, a Subclass of Women. And we intentionally produced this film in a way that addresses the political debate. So we interviewed altruistic surrogates, women who did this just because they're nice people. They weren't being paid, they weren't doing it for the money. We interviewed commercial surrogates, so women who were only motivated, well, not only, but mostly motivated by the financial compensation. We interviewed surrogates who were surrogates for strangers. The debate, do we just want this to happen within family, sisters helping sisters? So we interviewed women who literally answered ads, signed up, to help gay couples. And we interviewed a woman who was a surrogate for her gay brother and his husband. And we interviewed traditional surrogates, I don't like that, but women who used their own egg and their womb. So they literally were in contract to give away their biological child. They call that a traditional surrogate, but I say there's nothing traditional about that. And we interviewed gestational surrogates, right? So just their womb, not their egg. And any way you slice these women's stories, it all went bad. So that helps push back on the argument. Well, we can regulate so that we can mitigate any kind of problems that might arise. We can put lipstick on the pig, and it's no longer a pig because we've regulated. New York State just passed legalized commercial surrogacy during the height of the pandemic. Then Governor Cuomo slipped it in the wee hours of the night because the budget had to be passed, and it was slipped into the budget. And up until that point, altruistic surrogacy had always been legal in New York State, but he legalized commercial surrogacy. And why is that? They were clamoring. Women are not lining up to do 9 months pregnancy just because they're a good person. We need to be able to pay women for their work, for their time and their effort. So in Breeders, a Subclass of Women, we intentionally try to take a whack at the argument that regulation is the way forward. Regulation is the way that New Zealand can make sure that no women are exploited, no children are harmed, and everybody leaves a happy, satisfied customer. So the surrogates are told you're an angel, you're helping people, you're doing this miraculously wonderful thing, that legal problems are rare, we just need ironclad contracts, we need great laws that will protect all the stakeholders, that it's, you'll see the surrogates, I follow them all on social media, their bun, my oven, they're trained to disassociate from their body, it's not their baby, they're just, it's easy for them to, not attach and to separate from the baby. And that makes no difference to the baby, which in fact we know is categorically wrong, because we do know that there's this thing called maternal-child bonding. It's not maternal bonding that you can turn off and on, it's maternal-child bonding. And it's normally necessary and good and encouraged, but in the case of surrogacy, we discourage it. And I read so many surrogate contracts, because the first thing that happens when a woman contacts me because she's gotten into trouble, the first thing I say is, please send me your contract, because I want to read your contract so I know what you've agreed to, what you can and can't do to keep you from getting into further any kind of breach of contract or any kind of non-disclosure agreement she's signed. And the stuff that is in a surrogate contract, I always say, if you don't think this is a human rights violation, if you don't think this is 9 months of enslavement, read a surrogate contract and see what is written into these contracts that these women sign overwhelmingly because there's a big fat payday being offered to them and they need that money. So for example, one surrogate in California, she was a surrogate for strangers, people she'd still never met. She agreed per her contract to termination or selective reduction language, and she discovered upon positive pregnancy tests she was pregnant for triplets. And she'd signed a contract that said she would selectively reduce down the pregnancy. Of course, the intended parents who had hired her decided they didn't want triplets, they wanted twins. And so they asked her to reduce down one of the babies. And she said, yes, I agreed, but you never think it's going to happen, right? You never think it's going to happen, and that pressure of, I really need that money. And so she contacted our organization, and we had to scramble to get her pro bono legal help, because the contract is punitive. You're in breach of contract. You will have to pay back all of the money. If you don't terminate the pregnancy, if you allow that child to be born, you'll have to keep that child. So there's all this kind of punitive, manipulative, coercive kind of language that's attached to these contracts. Again, the marketing. United Kingdom doesn't allow marketing, but as they are looking at, in England, revamping their surrogacy laws, one of the things that they're trying to get into their law is that they'll be legally allowed to now advertise. But the advertisements are big. Take a baby home, no visa. This gets to the tourism problem. We'll navigate all the. If you're coming from a country that doesn't allow surrogacy, we'll help you get that baby home, and then of course all the money.
Who am I now? I'm a broken woman who has been used, lied to, and exploited. I very much regret my decision to serve as a surrogate. When you find out how much you can make from being a surrogate and how it's delivered to you as like this glamorous thing, you're gonna be catered to and you get to eat what you want and, become pregnant, and it's an amazing feeling, and it pays really well.
I believe that surrogacy does actually target people that are financially struggling.
The marketing is first very deceptive because it's all this wonderful language of doing something noble, great, compassionate, generous, but it's heavily targeted to people who need money.
After the first surrogacy that we did, I honestly never thought I would do it again.
The girl embryo got kicked out and the boy embryo split into identical twins.
They paid extra to have a boy and girl embryo specifically put in.
I would never think somebody who's paid $150,000, $200,000 for a baby didn't want it.
The bills all went to collections. I didn't save $10,000 to pay these bills.
Once we had the kids, that was supposed to be the end of it, and it wasn't.
I've now had my eyes open to the fact that this is really about money, not about the children.
Because that year, every year the theme at the United Nations is different, and that year it was economic empowerment and work for women. And a lot of the argument is this is economically empowering It's work, and women should be compensated. If you look at what's happening in third world countries, you'll hear people say, well, it's helping lift these people out of poverty, that they can rent their bodies and make all this money that they otherwise would never make. But in big fertility, again, thinking of breeders, we were just looking at the landscape in the United States and all these different machinations of how surrogacy can be practiced. With big fertility, we had one U.S. surrogate, you saw on camera there, Kelly Martinez, but she had done 3 different surrogacies. One was for a gay couple in France. All surrogacy is illegal in France. All surrogacy is illegal in France. The sky has yet to fall. And so the French are not prohibited to come to the United States. So they came to the United States and they hired Kelly Martinez, who at the time was, I think, 19 or 20, mother of 2 small children, very, very low economic situation in their home. Kelly was a high school dropout. She dropped out of school to take care of her mother, who was battling cancer, and her mother eventually died. But she saw an ad and thought, oh, this is a great way to help. She did not know, as a small little young mom, the laws of France. So she did not know that the French couple were going to have visa issues getting the children back to France when they were born. She became pregnant with twins. Once she delivered the babies, the French couple said, you need to go to Chicago. Kelly was living in South Dakota. You need to come to Chicago, which is very far away, and meet with us at the French consulate, because they wanted to bring the children back to France with passports. So they needed to be French citizens. Normally, when people come from France to the United States, they go back and they have to go through a legal formal adoption. And then the children will get passports, and then they will become French citizens. But they wanted to fast track. They wanted to leave the United States with passports for these children already French citizens. At that time, France had not yet legalized same-sex marriage in the country. So she gets to the consulate. She's already being told, if you don't do this, you will have to keep these twins. She's young, she's broke, she's got 2 small children. She goes to the consulate. The whole entire meeting is in French. She's signing documents that are in French. There's nobody that's translating. The story she's told that the French men have cooked up is that Kelly has had an affair with one of the men in the couple, and that these are her children, that she is biologically the mother of these children, and she's consenting to giving the children because she's trying to save her marriage from this infidelity, which of course was just a lie. And then they finally went back to France. When Kelly went with me to France, because the French have translated this film into French, she was so worried, and we had to assure her, because she thought the minute she stopped, put her foot on French soil, they'd arrest her for something that she did at the consulate, some documents that she signed. And the French were like, no, we're sure you'll be fine. But she was quite afraid to do that. Then the second surrogacy that Kelly did a few years later, again, because of their financial realities, was for a heterosexual couple in the United States. A year after Kelly gave birth to that little girl for that couple, they divorced. So she's like, and then she did it a 3rd time, and people keep saying, why did she do it again? Well, the first time she thought that was just a one-off, right? That will never happen again. The second time, well, it's just, it's a heterosexual couple, they're in America. She didn't know until after the fact that they were gonna end up in a divorce. But she did, was faced with a pretty dire financial situation, so she agreed to do her 3rd and last surrogacy for a Spanish couple. All surrogacy is illegal in Spain. All surrogacy is illegal in Spain. And this couple wanted twins, so she agreed to carry twins. Surrogates are paid an extra $5,000 in the United States if they'll carry twins. So for the extra baby, they get an extra bonus pay. And what happened was Kelly did not realize that they had paid for genetic testing of the embryos before they were implanted and transferred into Kelly. She did not realize that this couple had ordered a girl and a boy. So when, and Kelly had never met this couple, there was obviously a language barrier because Kelly doesn't speak Spanish, and this couple in Spain spoke a little bit of English, but not very, very good. But Kelly let them know when the ultrasound results came back. She was so thrilled that they were having twin boys. And immediately the relationship between Kelly and the couple in France just imploded because they had paid extra and they did not want 2 boys. And so the relationship became very strained because the couple in Spain was insistent that somebody had made a mistake, somebody had done something wrong, somebody hadn't followed the orders. And so it became very, very stressful for Kelly. And then the last few weeks of the pregnancy, she had to be admitted to the high-risk maternity ward because she developed severe preeclampsia and had gestational diabetes, was borderline stroke. She ended up having to have emergency cesarean section and delivered the children about 10 or 11 weeks premature, which is really premature even for twins. The way that Kelly came to contact me, and we actually opened the film Big Fertility, was I just opened up my email like we all do. We open up our computer and we check our inbox, and there was this cry for help. This couple had left France with their twins and left her with about $12,000 of unpaid high-risk hospital medical bills. And for a year, she was trying to get the agency in the United States to help her. And they were just like, oh, they're not answering our emails. And we've called their lawyer, and he's not answering our phone calls. And, well, gee, that's just really too bad for you, Kelly. And so she, of course, her credit was ruined. The creditors were after her and her husband because all the bills are in her name, right? The babies don't get her name on their birth certificate, but she's got all the bills. And so I had this cry for help from her, was there anything that I can do? And I said, well, I've got a big mouth, and I can, make a lot of noise. And so we call, the Spanish have translated Big Fertility into Spanish, and they brought Kelly and I over to Madrid. We met with all members of the Spanish Parliament. We did a big screening of the film in Spanish, the translated version, to a big audience there. But the night before we got on a plane, Kelly called the agency in the United States, and she said, I just want you to know tomorrow I'm flying to Madrid to speak to the members of the Spanish Parliament about what happened. And the next day, the agency paid all of her bills. Yeah. But isn't that sad? Because, her credit rating still was in the toilet. And it took, years for them to dig themselves out of, all these bad credit ratings for all of these outstanding bills. But that's, that is just and I wish I could say that that's a rarity, these kind of situations. And if you've been following surrogacy at all through the global pandemic and the lockdowns, with surrogates being trapped in Ukraine, carrying babies for people in California or China, or if you look at what's happened during the war in Ukraine with all this, we have a woman in the United States that's a surrogate for a couple that can't get to her because of either travel restrictions or bans or wars or something. I mean, it just creates this stateless children problem. And who are these parents? And what happens? What are the rights to these children? We had one surrogate in, I think, I want to say Idaho, and she had a baby that she gave birth to for a couple in China, and she had that baby for over a year because of the travel bans. And then all of a sudden the baby is somebody comes from China to get that baby and then brings it over a year later and then plops it into a whole different culture. And when you think about the maternal-child bonding, and that child had bonded with this whole family for so long. So this whole area of reproductive tourism is real. As one border closes down, as the global south closes down, the market shifts. The market shifted to Ukraine. The war there does not seem to be slowing business at all. In fact, I hear reports that business is better than ever, even though there's still raging war there. And if you look at the French law, back to again France, and the fact that France bans all surrogacy, they have linked their laws around surrogacy with their slavery laws, and said, how can you do this in any way that doesn't enslave women and doesn't treat children as products to be bought and sold and traded. So I hope you'll join me in stopping this business and shutting it all down. Thank you.